And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's December the 29th, the 363rd day of the year. Just 2 days remain to the year's over with, and we start a new one. And let's see. Holidays and observances. International Cello Day. If you've ever had a hankering to play the cello, this is your day. National Pepper Pot Day. TikTok Day. Work through your to-do list and finish any odd jobs so you can leave your worries behind and focus on the future. Zagreb Advent. Kwanzaa. Uniting in cultural richness, illuminating principles like unity and purpose and creativity through vibrant rituals and meaningful gathering. Kwanzaa is a day that a lot of people look forward to. Christmas Bird Count Week, Artes Mundi, and of course, we're still got Blue Christmas going on through the 31st. People born on this date: Ted Danson, John Voight, Andrew Johnson, and Allison Brie. All that having been said, let's see what stories we have in the news. Well, Elon Musk is back in the news. He's warned people are going to die over Mandami's Fire Department of New York Commissioner pick, Lillian Bonsignore. He's chosen quite an interesting group of radicals to help his administration. But on Friday, Elon Musk slammed incoming New York City Mayor Zoran Mandami for selecting a woman without operational firefighting experience as the head of the fire department of the city of New York. He says people are going to die because of this. He served as President Trump's administration. He's proven experience matters when lives are at stake. And the mere fact that you're a radical doesn't give you expertise in a lot of different areas. Mandami's going to take office January 1st as the appointed Lillian Bonsignore, a 31-year Fire Department of New York veteran who led EMS operations during the COVID-19 pandemic. She's going to become the commissioner of the fire department this week. First woman to achieve a 4-star rank in the Fire Department of New York City's history. So she's going to be joining the fire department as the commissioner to bring her crisis leadership and operational expertise to the administration. She's only the second woman to hold the position and the first openly gay person in that role. Yes, the gays are going to be dominating New York City. Well, 60 Sex Kitten. Legendary French actress, animal rights activist Brigitte Bardot died at 91. That's according to an announcement made by her foundation yesterday. Brigitte Bardot Foundation announces with immense sadness the death of its founder and president, Madame Brigitte Bardot, a world-renowned actress and singer. Chose to abandon her prestigious career to dedicate her life and energy to animal welfare and to a foundation. She'd been hospitalized briefly in late October at the St. Jean Hospital in Toulon, where she underwent a minor surgical procedure. That's according to a statement from her office. Became known in the 1950s and 60s for her sex kitten image, a label that came to define her on-screen persona. It's a continuing story. Well, Christmas target practice has turned deadly as stray bullets killed an Oklahoma woman sitting quietly on her own front porch. Oklahoma man is facing first-degree manslaughter charge after authorities say a bullet he fired while doing target practice in his backyard struck and killed a woman sitting with her family on Christmas Day. Cody Adams, 33, is charged with first-degree manslaughter in connection with the shooting, according to court records. At about 3:15 in the afternoon, December 25th, that's Christmas Day, don't you know? The Stevens County Sheriff's Office responded to reports of a shooting at Stevens County, Oklahoma, where Sandra Phelps was fatally struck while sitting on her front porch holding a child, according to a probable cause affidavit. Witnesses told deputies they periodically heard gunshots over several minutes north of the residence before Phelps said ouch and collapsed. Just moments before, Phelps allegedly commented somebody got a new gun for Christmas. Investigators determined the bullet entered her upper right arm and traveled through her chest, consistent with a steep downward angle. A canvas of nearby properties identified one residence with not a suitable shooting backdrop, which belonged to Adams, according to the affidavit. Adams told deputies he'd been shooting a new Glock 45 caliber handgun, bought for himself for Christmas. Showed police where he'd been shooting in his backyard at a red ball on the ground. I'm sorry. Can't read my own handwriting. Red Bull on the ground. The affidavit states there was nothing behind his property to stop any bullets from traveling beyond his property and hurting somebody. Investigators said they found spent shell casings and a piece of broken ceramic tile in front of the target, which they say likely caused the bullet's altered trajectory, according to the affidavit. So if you're going to go out and shoot in your backyard, make sure there's a backstop. NFL teams should expect Ricky Williams-type price tag and potential Joe Burrow trade talks. You know, you get in the NFL and you're literally a millionaire overnight. For the third consecutive season, the Cincinnati Bengals will be on the outside looking in when NFL playoffs kick off. Joe Burrow's future with the team has been a topic of conversation as the Bengals come to terms with the reality of another season not going as planned. The star quarterback recently made comments that seemingly fuel speculation his status with the franchise that selected him first overall 6 seasons ago. He hinted he enjoyed the game, and that was a priority to him, saying he wanted to go have fun and play football. Well, amid the speculation, NFL insider Jonathan Jones responded that multiple teams could pursue Burrow this offseason. While it remains unlikely that Cincinnati will deal the 29-year-old, any team that does inquire about Burrow should be prepared to meet a hefty asking price. The problem is, as I learned in college, quite often it goes to their heads. Well, President Trump and Zelensky from Ukraine meet in Florida to discuss efforts to end the Ukraine war. The Ukrainian leader vows the country do whatever it takes to end the war. President Trump's going to be the host as President Vladimir Zelensky met Sunday in the latest effort to close out 4 years of war. They're going to meet. I can't talk. Good Lord. They met Trump in Florida at the president's Mar-a-Lago estate, where he spent much of his time over the holiday period. Ukraine's leader emphasized the need to negotiate from a position of strength in a public statement released prior to the meeting. Russian-Ukrainian negotiations are repeatedly broken down over where the final territorial lines have fallen in a peace agreement. According to what Zelensky said on X, Ukraine was willing to do whatever it takes to stop the war. For us, priority number one, and the only priority, is ending the war. For us, the priority is peace. We need to be strong at the negotiating table. To be strong, we need the support of the world, Europe and the United States. Well, a massive fire engulfed a historic New York wharf. Firefighters raced to try to contain the flames. Firefighters battled to contain a massive blaze that sparked Friday evening in a historic wharf in Portland, Maine. One building was destroyed in the fire, and others were damaged in the blaze that broke out on the Custom House Wharf. According to Fox 23. The old port in Portland was a major 19th century and early 20th century hub for the commercial fishing industry in the area and is now a popular tourist area with restaurants and shops. Working fishermen still keep their boats there. Unfortunately, it looked like the fire had a pretty good head start on attempts to put it out when everybody got there. But the first companies did a great job, and they made a really aggressive attack to keep it from spreading down the rest of the wharf, according to Deputy Fire Chief John Hendricks. Portland Restaurant and Pub on the wharf posted Friday that it survived the fire, and it was open. Well, former vice presidential candidate and Governor Wilkes slammed in the wake of a viral video that raises daycare funding questions. A lot of folks say he needs to be held accountable. Politicians took to social media on Saturday to criticize Minnesota Governor Tim Walz after a viral video raised questions about a Minneapolis daycare center that allegedly received millions of dollars in state funding, despite appearing to be largely inactive. They got paid just for breathing. Responding to the next post highlighting the allegations of all the Medicaid fraud and voter fraud in the state, Vice President Vance described the situation as a microcosm of the immigration fraud rampant in our system. He says politicians like it because they get power. Welfare chiefs like it because they get rich. It's a zero-sum game, and they're stealing both money and political power from Minnesotans. Well, and the fraud goes all the way up to Congress. Well, Pop-Tarts pastry bails on a celebration and for the wild moments from a bowl game. Tensions got toasty at the Pop-Tarts Bowl between the Brigham Young University Cougars and Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets on Saturday night. While Georgia Tech held the lead for most of the game, Brigham Young University pulled off a barnstorming comeback to win the game 25-21. The Cougars finished the season 12-2, and Georgia Tech ended the year 9-4. Pop-Tarts brought fun to the bowl game while the competition itself came down to the wire. But that's one bowl game I've never heard of before, the Pop-Tart Bowl. I guess they figured the game was heating up, so why not? Well, country star Megan Maroney posted Christmas bikini photos from a beach getaway. 28-year-old country singer posted a series of photos on Instagram from her Christmas vacation, which included pictures of the picturesque ocean view. One of the photos, she can be seen lying on the sand in a red and pink bikini, which showed off her toned abs, paired to look with a white and pink hat that covered her face. The carousel of photos also featured a black and white picture of her with wet hair, seemingly on a boat in the ocean. Well, there's a picture of a Christmas tree and one of her and her loved ones posing on the beach, in which she sported a pink Santa hat. Well, according to the experts, now's the time to stock up on those items that you've been wanting before prices jump in 2026. Retailers increased inventory 14% between May and September as they front-loaded purchases before facing additional tariff duties. Customers ought to be stocking up on essentials, particularly home goods category, as those items are expected to see noticeable price increases in 2026. That's according to Wells Fargo, of all groups. Well, well, the Iranian president says his country is at total war with the U.S. and Israel and Europe. Masoud Pezeshkian said his country is engaged in what he describes as a total war with the U.S. Did an interview published Saturday by Iranian state media. Said he believes the Western powers want to bring Iran to its knees. That's according to the Times of Israel. In my opinion, we're at total war with the U.S., Israel, and Europe. They want to bring our country to its knees, and we've got to oppose that. He argued that the current conflict is more complex than the Iraq-Iran war of the 1980s. Says this country is now under pressure from every angle. If one understands it well, the war is far more complex and difficult than that war. In the war with Iraq, the situation was clear. They fired missiles, and we knew where to hit. Here, they're besieging us from every aspect. They're creating problems for us in terms of livelihood and culturally and politically and security-wise. But despite the strain, he says Iran's military has emerged stronger following its June conflict with Israel. Yes, they're going to pull off a miracle. Well, an unlucky Honduran woman was arrested after allegedly running a red light and crashing into an ICE vehicle. This Honduran national had an unlucky encounter with a Border Patrol enforcement agents on Friday. Allegedly ran a red light and slid down to Louisiana, rammed into an immigration customs enforcement vehicle. That's according to U.S. Border Patrol Commander Greg Bovino. Apparently, she never learned the lesson that red means stop, not accelerate and collide with a government vehicle actively enforcing federal law. Well, there were no injuries reported as a result of the crash, according to the Post, but Bovino said she was certainly taken into custody. Unlucky for her, lucky for us, he said. Well, federal agents are in that area as part of Operation Cthulhu Crunch. Operation targets illegal migrants in the New Orleans area, and there are a lot of them. Well, Amazon has stopped buying these everyday essentials in the stores. They're actually cheaper on Amazon. These days, Amazon quietly beats the big box store prices more often than you'd think. From laundry detergent to cleaning sprays and batteries, we got a list of the best Amazon deals on everyday essentials. Duracell AA batteries, Bounty 8-pack family rolls, paper towels, Swiffer duster kits, Clorox disinfecting all-purpose cleaner 3-pack, wooden spoon sets, silicone baking mats, 3-piece sets, cooling rack set, 125-pack of compostable paper plates, Christmas paper party cups, and Christmas paper napkins. Yes, there's a lot of Christmas stuff that are right now on sale. Well, according to the Treasury Secretary, America's going to get a gigantic tax refund next year. Treasury Secretary says households could see a $1,000 to $2,000 refund due to President Trump's retroactive tax cuts. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent predicted Americans are going to see gigantic refund checks in the upcoming filing season thanks to tax cuts and President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And Bessent also serves as the acting commissioner of the IRS, made that remark during an appearance on the All In podcast. Treasury Secretary told the host the tax provisions in the act, which Trump signed in July, applied retroactively to the beginning of the year. And because most workers didn't change their withholdings, a lot of folks can expect sizable refunds in 2026. It'd be nice to see any kind of refund. Well, medical analysts have raised alarms about bogus GLP-1 prescriptions that you can get online. There are many people buying their medication at online pharmacies, and they're not getting exactly what they think they're getting. Well, let's see if there's anything else. Let's see. Windows 11, Microsoft Office, and a lot of other software is on sale starting at under $10. Well, DHS officials have ripped Kilmar Abrego Garcia for making TikToks while the agency faces a gag order from one of God's anointed. The Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin on Saturday took aim at Kilmar Garcia for making TikToks while the DHS remains restrained by an activist judge. She was reacting to a minute-long video that appears to show Abrego Garcia, an El Salvadoran illegal immigrant, became a flashpoint in the Trump administration's mass deportations campaign, filming himself lip-syncing to a song in Spanish. If you remember, he's the one the Democrats almost had a meltdown over. He was such a wonderful person. The mere fact he beat up his wife is, that these things happen. Well, and finally, a Texas 19-year-old by the name of Camila Mendoza almost vanished outside her house on Christmas Eve. Search has been underway since Saturday in Texas after this 19-year-old woman who normally goes for a morning walk vanished outside her home. Happened on Christmas Eve. Last seen leaving her residence in the 11,000 block of Caspian Spring in San Antonio about 6:58 in the morning on Wednesday. That's according to the Bexar County Sheriff's Office. Her mother stated that she normally goes for a morning walk, but she became concerned when the girl didn't return within a reasonable period of time. Video footage from that time period shows an unknown individual believed to be Camilla's searching inside her vehicle for an unidentified item. Shortly after that, the footage ended. It's believed that she left the residence on foot as her vehicle remained at the location. Only items known to be on her person are her car keys and maybe her driver's license. Well, hopefully she gets found. Well, on that note, let's go to our main topic today. We're going to be talking about some more conspiracy theories, because I've gotten a lot of feedback on some of the shows I've done about conspiracy theories. Anybody in my generation remembers the one and only Walter Cronkite doing stories about the Kennedy assassination? That happened November 22nd, 1963, don't you know? That was one of the most, been described as one of the most unforgettable moments in history. Well, that's not the only conspiracy theory. And a lot of classified documents about the Kennedy case have been released recently. And I just finished up my newest book, my 98th book, about the number of deaths directly and indirectly related to the Kennedy assassination. Over 50 potential witnesses either vanished or are found dead for unexplained reasons. Well, the same could be said about the Lincoln assassination. According to history, Lincoln's assassin, John Wilkes Booth, was cornered and killed in a burning Virginia barn 12 days after he killed the president. But there's a number of other stories that said that wasn't the case. He lived under an alias for a number of years after he supposedly died. Conspiracy theorists and serious investigators have argued and speculated about the fate of John Wilkes Booth for more than a century. Now, over the years, even the family of Booth and former presidents and even the Freemasons have had discussions about whether or not John Wilkes Booth really died in that barn. And a number of folks who have specialized in discussing conspiracy theories have made TV documentaries and TV shows and done radio shows. According to a lot of folks, histories can be looked at as a great game of telephone. But what you have to do is find that very first whisper. So we're going to talk about some of those, what you might refer to as the first whispers. The facts we're taught in school aren't always true. And for those who want the full solution to every historical mystery, you don't always get what you want. So let's start out talking about John Wilkes Booth, who, during his day and age, prior to the assassination, was one of the top stars of theater. Well, according to one story, the most famous assassin in American history lived almost 40 years after his supposed death. Now, according to the story we're taught in school, in 1865, on a Friday night at Ford's Theater, John Wilkes Booth killed the 16th President of the United States with a single bullet to the back of the head. Instantly, he became America's most wanted man. He jumped from the presidential balcony, breaking his leg when he hit the stage, and fled on horseback across Maryland and Virginia. But some folks have long speculated that the history books that tell us that Booth was shot 12 days later at Garrett's farm near Port Royal, Virginia, are wrong. A lot of people believe that Booth didn't die that night. They said he was actually acting on behalf of the Confederate Secret Service, who then aided him in his escape. They argued that the man killed in Garrett's barn was actually a look-alike, a patsy used to throw off Union soldiers. And what's even more amazing, this is just one of three plausible theories about Booth's escape. And if there's even the slightest possibility John Wilkes Booth was able to escape the law and live as a fugitive for another 40 years, that's certainly something worth looking into. Now, on April 14th, 1865, Good Friday, don't you know, less than a week after Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant in Appomattox, Virginia, actually in the living room of one of my relatives, President and Mrs. Lincoln made plans to attend the play Our American Cousins, along with the Lincolns. The play starred Laura Keene at the Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. John Wilkes Booth was only 26 at the time. A very well-known stage actor. A lot of folks referred to him as the Brad Pitt of his day. Had his own plans for the theater that night. And those plans involved a .44 caliber Derringer. Now, history shows that Booth had a dark side. He was an obsessed, fanatical supporter of the Confederate cause. When he learned that President Mrs. Lincoln would be attending a performance by renowned actress Laura Keene in the popular comedy Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., Booth decided to get revenge for the Union victory by assassinating Lincoln. Now, Ford's Theater is a perfect place for Booth to stage his final performance. As a famous actor, of course, he was friends with the owner. He'd been in the theater's inaugural play, even got his mail delivered there. He knew the place inside and out. It was his home turf, so to speak. And on the night he shot President Lincoln, he didn't even try to conceal his identity. Walked in the front door while the performance was still going on, said hello to the people that recognized him, and made his way to the hallway outside the president's private box. Now, presidential security back in those days was absolutely nothing remotely like it is today. Lincoln generally traveled with 2 guards. Conveniently on this night, the man who was supposed to be guarding the door to the box wasn't even there. He left the theater to go get a drink with some friends at a nearby bar. So Booth peered through the peephole in the door that he said to have drilled earlier that day to see who was inside. And there wasn't even a guard inside the president's box, just Lincoln, his wife, and another couple. The Grants had decided not to come. Mrs. Grant didn't particularly care for Mrs. Lincoln. Booth had even memorized the play. Waited till the big laugh line, don't know the manners of good society, eh? Well, I guess I know enough to turn you inside out, old gal. He socked the lodging old man trap. Well, If that had been delivered today, you'd hear crickets, but in 1865, it literally brought the house down. When the big joke hit and everybody laughed, Booth opened the unlocked door, and yes, the door wasn't even locked. Walked up behind the president and shot him. Then he stabbed a military officer who tried to stop him as he jumped from the box to the stage, which was just 11 feet down. Landing hard, he got up and delivered the last line he'd ever speak on stage. The most famous line of his life, many have said. Sic semper tyrannis, the Latin phrase, making clear Booth's sentiments, thus always to tyrants. Well, literally chaos erupted throughout the theater. Now, a lot of folks say that Booth broke his leg when he landed. So in pure adrenaline, he ran out of the stage door, mounted his waiting horse, and galloped off into the night. History tells us that 2 weeks later, Booth was surrounded in the Virginia barn and killed by a religious fanatic wearing Union clothes. But for decades, the Booth family members have offered a different version of events. Joanne Hume, a distant relative of the Booths, claims when she was a little girl, her mother shared with her the truth about how Booth died. According to what her mother told her, they're going to say he died in a barn. He didn't die in that barn. He lived for a lot of years after that. Well, Booth, along with David Harold, a confidant and federal Confederate sympathizer, fled on horseback through Maryland into Virginia. And they were traveling at high speed for the time, covering 14 miles in a matter of 2 hours, pausing to collect previously hidden weapons and supplies from the Surratt House, a tavern in Clinton, Maryland. Now, Booth never got off his horse and probably wasn't there for more than 5 minutes, but he did have time enough to boast he just killed the President of the United States. He thought he was a hero. He believed he'd done the Confederacy a favor. Well, Harold and Booth raced from the Surratts and headed south another 14 miles to Waldorf, Maryland. But this time it took him 4 hours instead of 2. Now, if he did break his leg when he jumped down to the stage, he had to be in intense pain. So they were forced to stop at the house of a Dr. Samuel Mudd. Dr. Mudd set the leg, and it was there that some say Booth took his first steps toward assuming a brand new identity. It was reported he shaved off his mustache and maybe even covered his hair. He was now officially on the run. Where Booth and Harold left Dr. Mudd's in the morning, the manhunt for Booth was on, of course. There was already a $100,000 price on his head, which was a fortune for 1865. In today's dollars, that'd be $1.3 million. So Booth and Harold spent several days trekking through the forest and the swamp, making their way south to friendlier territory. And on April 24th, they arrived at Garrett's farm near Port Royal, Virginia. This is the fork in the road, so to speak. The belief has always been that Booth was killed in Garrett's barn 2 nights later by Union soldiers. But there are, in fact, a lot of people who believe that Booth was never at Garrett's barn, and if he was there, it was only briefly. So who was in the barn, if it wasn't Booth? Lincoln assassination scholar John Chaconas believes the play-by-play went a little bit along these lines. 26 Union soldiers have Booth and Harold surrounded in the barn. Harold starts freaking out. He wants to surrender. Booth, of course, is very comfortable being on stage alone. So Booth kicks Harold out of the barn, and Harold emerges, immediately taken into custody. He'll be tried and hung within 10 days. So now soldiers demand Booth surrender. He sent back 2 words: no way. For Booth, this was a performance of a lifetime. He doesn't plan on leaving the stage. One of the soldiers sets fire to the back of the barn in an attempt to flush Booth out. Another soldier spots Booth inside the barn and fires a shot, hitting him in the back of the neck. And then Booth is dragged out of the barn, and as he lays dying, Harold asks a Union Army Lieutenant, Edward Doherty, who was that man who the shot in there? Who was he? And Doherty reportedly replied, "You know very well who that was." And Harold supposedly replied, "No, I don't." He said his name was Boyd. I don't know it. I didn't know it was Booth. Now, here's where it doesn't really make any sense. Why would Harold say Booth's name was Boyd? He's been captured, nothing to gain. What's more important, who is Boyd? Is it possible he's some sort of patsy placed there to take the fall for Booth? Even speculation the body drug out of Garrett's barn didn't even look like John Wilkes Booth. Now, Booth researcher Nathan Orwick maintains it's impossible that the man killed in that barn was John Wilkes Booth. According to him, 3 different witnesses said that the man who was killed in the barn had reddish hair, even though it's a known fact that John Wilkes Booth had jet black hair, and Dr. May, Booth's doctor, says the body looked much older than John Wilkes Booth. Now, Dr. May, of course, knew the real Booth. O'Rourke believes Booth left Garrett's barn 2 days before the Union Army got there. He thinks it was in everybody's interest for it to be believed that John Wilkes Booth was dead. And the reward money offered for Booth's head was literally unbelievable for the time. The political pressure to catch him was huge. We got to remember the country was in complete chaos at this point. The war was over, but the Confederacy was still very much alive in spirit. The nation was so unstable, all the pressure was on Secretary of War Edwin Stanton to bring Lincoln's assassin to justice. So now you got motive for a cover-up. With the eyes of the entire nation on him, there's just no way to understand the lengths that Stanton might have gone to close this case. And knowing that the nation needed Lincoln's killer brought to justice so it could survive as a united country, there was one major question that needed to be answered. Did Stanton place a Booth look-alike at Garrett's farm? Well, the most compelling piece of evidence that may have been the case comes from John Simonton, who served in the office of the Judge Advocate General of the War Department for 43 years. According to Simonton's statement, I studied the evidence in the case and found no definitive proof that John Wilkes Booth was ever captured. So, the question became, if it wasn't Booth, who was Boyd? Well, the National Archives in Washington, D.C. have a service record for Captain James W. Boyd, a Confederate soldier in the 6th Tennessee Infantry. He was a Union prisoner of war back then. Prisoner Boyd was directed by Secretary of War Stanton to be transferred to Washington, D.C. Now, why would Stanton, who literally was ruling as a dictator at this point, want James Boyd in D.C.? Well, it turns out Boyd was actually a spy for the Union. His job was to inform the North about Confederate smuggling operations in Tennessee. And his paper trail goes cold at a critical time. He vanished from any records at all on February 15th, 1865. That was 2 months before the president's assassination. It's also within the National Archives resides a photograph of Boyd, and when put side by side with a photograph of Booth, there's no question there's a great resemblance. Except for hair color, James Boyd's a dead ringer for John Wilkes Booth. So there's a lot of folks that believe that Boyd was summoned to D.C. by Stanton to be the fall guy. Was he inserted into the barn that night undercover so he could become Booth? I mean, it's a crazy theory, but remember, if Stanton's covering this up, it also means Stanton needs a body. And speaking of the body, well, a lot of strange things went down during Booth's autopsy. According to Jan Herman, a naval historian who studied the autopsy records of John Wilkes Booth, Booth's body was brought from Garrett's farm to the USS Montauk, Monitor-class ironclad ship. There were 13 people present for the autopsy, all connected to the War Department or the Navy Department, including a photographer. And Herman claims only one photograph of Booth's body was ever taken, and that negative was handed over to a detective that turned it into the Secretary of War Stanton as soon as it was snapped. Well, Herman believed that negative had been lost over the decades, maybe intentionally. Even more intriguing, Booth's family's not even allowed to see the body. And even more intriguing than that, there were other apprehended Lincoln assassin conspirators being held prisoner on board the Montauk, but none of them were brought up on deck to identify Booth. Prominent District Attorney Surgeon Dr. John Frederick May, who was summoned to identify the body and who actually operated on Booth years before, told the assembled witnesses, "This body doesn't even look like Booth. I don't recall Booth being freckled. I don't recall him being as old as this gentleman is." But according to Herman, Dr. May felt pressure to go along with the idea that it was Booth's body. It was suggested Dr. May went along with the investigation because he didn't want to risk being implicated in any part of the assassination. So under immense pressure, Dr. May signed off that the body was in fact that of John Wilkes Booth. Herman believes these details revealed a very sloppy identification of Booth, one that might not hold up to scrutiny. Also believes that 3 little letters that could potentially blow this investigation wide open. DNA, don't you know? During Booth's autopsy, the cervical vertebra and a small section of his spinal cord were removed. And these pieces of Booth's body are still available today. They currently reside at the National Museum of Health and Medicine in Maryland. And Herman believes if you extract a DNA sample of Booth's tissue from the vertebrae and the spinal cord and compare it to samples of the DNA taken from partial exhumation of Edwin Booth, John's brother, you had to give indisputable evidence as to whether or not it was actually John Wilkes Booth who was shot and killed at Garrett's Barn on April 26, 1865. I mean, nothing would be stronger than an actual DNA comparison. And now, it's actually possible. All that's necessary is to get permission to test that piece of bone in Maryland and compare it to the sample of Booth's brother Edwin's body in Massachusetts. And in recent years, believe it or not, Booth's descendants have taken steps to do just that. But until the courts allow that to happen, the question remains unanswered. But we do have to ask, why would they possibly deny what would give them the truth? Well, when you're dealing with assassinations as prominent as Kennedy and Booth and Lincoln, a lot of strange things do happen. But at this point, we have to ask, if John Wilkes Booth did not die in that barn, if he continued to live, there should be some evidence of that. So the question becomes, where did he go? Now, one theory is that when Booth realized Jefferson Davis wasn't going to throw a parade for him and basically excuse me, basically it screwed himself, he adopted an alias. Well, in talking to the people who have developed various theories, 2 different aliases surfaced that have enough credible evidence surrounding them to investigate. John St. Helen and John B. Wilkes. Now this, in fact, gives us 3 possibilities. One is that Booth assumed Boyd's identity, though there are no records of Boyd after Lincoln's assassination. And another is Booth assumed the alias John B. Wilkes and fled the country. And the final is that as a patriot who was willing to kill for his country, Booth possibly stayed in the U.S. and lived out his days in West Texas under the alias of John St. Helen. Now, I've talked to a number of folks here in West Texas who believe that's absolutely the case. Chuck Hooper, the John Wilkes Booth researcher, believes Booth pulled off a 19th century version of identity theft. He believes Booth was introduced to an Englishman in Indiana named John B. Wilkes. He was born in Sheffield, England in 1822. Hubert claims Booth stole Wilkes' identity and traveled to India, posing as an Englishman, where he remained until his death in 1883. Hubert believes John B. Wilkes actually returned to the U.S. in 1873, as a photograph of Wilkes, he says, was taken during that visit. And the man in that photograph actually looks identical to John Wilkes Booth. Hubert doubles down on his theory with a will that he says John B. Wilkes wrote in India in 1883, 18 years after Booth was supposed to have died. And there were special bequests to people who were friends and family of John Wilkes Booth. One segment from that will says he's given $25,000 to Margarita Rosalie Wilkes, natural heir of my body. She's Wilkes's daughter by his wife, Isola Mills Darcy Booth, who's said to have married John Wilkes Booth in 1859. Also gave $25,000 to Mary Louise Turner, natural heir of my body. Turner's another daughter of Booth, this time Ella Turner, who was at the time of the assassination John Wilkes Booth's mistress. There's also a bequest to an individual by the name of Henry Johnson. He gave $1,000 a year to Henry Johnson, a free Negro to whom I owe my very life. He was Booth's personal valet, later escaped to Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. So you can't help but ask, why in the world would John Byron Wilkes be giving money to John Wilkes Booth's wife and daughters and former valet? Well, Hubbard offers a simple explanation. It wasn't John B. Wilkes who actually wrote the will. Now, this is compelling evidence it was actually John Wilkes Booth writing his will as John B. Wilkes, but here's where this all falls apart. The will isn't actually signed. If it was, anybody be able to analyze the handwriting and compare it against other known Booth signatures. Without a signature or any other way to authenticate the will, and no way to authenticate the photograph of Wilkes, theories that John Wilkes Booth lived out his years as an Englishman, John B. Wilkes, it just remains just a theory. Now that leaves John St. Helen. Now, M. Turner Chitty is the daughter of the late Dr. Arthur Ben Chitty. Arthur was the historiographer at the University of the South and one of the main proponents of the theory that John Wilkes Booth used John St. Helens as an alias. Now, Dr. Chitty passed away in 2002. His daughter has now become the family Booth expert. And Chitty contends Booth actually arrived in Franklin County, Tennessee in 1872. Fell in love and married a local girl named Louisa Payne. According to Chitty, when Booth confessed to Louisa, he would love her forever, and he was also assassinated the 16th president of the United States. Louisa was unfazed. Well, she became a bit fazed, I guess you could say, when she found out she had married a man under the wrong name. She freaked out so much she demanded they go back to the courthouse and get remarried using Booth's real name. And according to Chitty, the Franklin County Courthouse marriage register clearly shows John W. Booth's signature on February 24th, 1872, 7 years after the assassination. But what might raise your eyebrows even more is when 90-year-old Juanita Keel, a living relative of Louisa Payne, decided it was time to talk. She said, "My grandmother's sister married John Wilkes Booth. They were married before he told her who he was." Keel went on to say that Booth went by the name of John St. Helen until he came clean to Louisa. As newlyweds, Booth and Louisa moved to Memphis, where she grew homesick. Louisa returned home to her family. Booth told her he'd come back, but he never did. The identity of Louisa Payne's husband remains a closely held family secret before Keel decided to come forward and talk about it. When asked how her family felt being married to the mob, Juanita said it's not to be talked about outside the family. So you might question why she was willing to talk about it when she was interviewed. She said, "Well, at my age, I would have said everybody's dead that mattered. Anybody that would have been hurt by the truth, so I'll tell it now." So the question becomes now, where did John St. Helen go from Memphis? Mary Bates Webby, granddaughter of lawyer Phineas Bates, believes her grandfather was a confidant of John Wilkes Booth in Granbury, Texas, but he was calling himself John St. Helen at the time. According to Webby, Bates received news that St. Helen was dying and sent for him. Said he needed to make a deathbed confession. Told Bates how he escaped. Webby retells the story. As he made the confession, his grandfather began to think no man would make a deathbed confession this serious if he wasn't a real person. Well, according to Bates, John St. Helen did not die that day. He actually recovered and left Texas and settled in Enid, Oklahoma, assuming a new identity, David E. George. And here's the crazy part. That name appears to be code. Two of Booth's co-conspirators were David Harold and George Adzabat. Hence the name David E. George. It's either a sly reference to Booth's true identity or just a guy with two first names. In 1903, Bates saw an obituary indicating a man from Enid, Oklahoma had confessed to being John Wilkes Booth. Body was in the mortuary waiting to be claimed. So what did Bates do? He makes a trip to Enid to identify the body, and sure enough, it was his friend John St. Helen, or John Wilkes Booth. Well, there's no way to really prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Booth was either John St. Helen or John B. Wilkes. The only way to know for sure is to exhume Edwin Booth's body and do a DNA testing. And thus far, that has not been agreed to by any of God's anointed. Well, the David E. George part of this very convoluted theory is one of the wildest parts of the story. This man committed suicide by actually drinking arsenic. And the arsenic combined with embalming fluids actually mummified his body. So when Finis Bates arrived to identify the body, they gave him the mummy because nobody else claimed it. So, what do we got at this point? We got a will that's not signed that leaves various bequests, folks close to the real John Wilkes Booth. No way the Englishman, John B. Wilkes, would have known him. We got a mummy, said to be the mummified body of John Wilkes Booth. We got people giving away mummies. Over the years, Bates even tried to sell the mummy a few times. Actually offered it to Henry Ford for $1,000, but ultimately ended up, like so many mummies, in Ford's garage. When Bates died in 1923, his wife sold it to a traveling circus. In fact, that mummy toured the United States for almost 50 years before it vanished in the early 1970s. So we got people paying to see a mummified body they think is that of John Wilkes Booth. It does have to raise a lot of questions. Now, there is evidence that John Wilkes Booth may not have been killed at Garrett's barn. But the question becomes, is that evidence airtight? Can it be proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that Booth was neither John St. Helen or John B. Wilkes? Well, literally, the only way to know for sure is to actually exhume Edwin Booth's body and do a DNA testing. We have DNA available from John Wilkes Booth's body. Unfortunately, it takes the finding of one of God's anointed. And the problem is, exhuming his dead body isn't as easy as it used to be. You don't just run out in the middle of the night with a shovel and start digging. When the Booth family finally petitioned in 1994 to have Booth's body exhumed and its DNA tested against his brother Edwin, the state's attorney in Baltimore originally said it's okay to exhume John Wilkes Booth's remains. But then somebody, nobody's really sure who, appealed that decision to the courts, and it went to a judge for a decision. Well, the judge wrote that the alleged remains of John Wilkes Booth were buried in an unknown location 126 years ago. There's evidence that 3 infant siblings are buried on top of John Wilkes Booth remains. And there may well be severe water damage to the Booth burial plot, and no dental records available for comparison. So any identification might be inconclusive. So the above reasons, coupled with the unreliability of the petitioner's less than convincing escape cover-up theory, gives rise to the conclusion there's no compelling reason for exhumation. In other words, the judge said, don't bother me with facts. Additionally, one of the objections to examining John Wilkes Booth's body was it had been out of the ground for as long as 6 weeks after exhumation. Now, that was over 20 years ago. Given today's technology, it's a far easier workaround. All it needs a sample from Booth's brother Edwin and access to that bone in the museum in Maryland. In fact, a DNA test is our best shot at solving the John Wilkes Booth case once and for all. If we want to close this chapter of our history, we'll need to compare the samples that we know exist with a DNA sample from Booth's brother Edwin. The test is either going to show that they're brothers or that they're not related at all. Without that, all we have is a great story about a famous actor who jumped from a stage to legend by pulling off the role of his life, hiding his own identity and hiding from history. So until we can force the hands of the powers that be and test that DNA, we'll never know for sure whether John Wilkes Booth died in 1865 or not. You know, part of the issue here is that, as strange as it sounds, there are a lot of families that still have a dog in the fight, so to speak. If Edwin Stanton did pull off an assassination conspiracy, the Stanton family doesn't want that known. History reports Edwin Stanton was Secretary of War and literally, great risk to himself, held this country together after Lincoln's assassination. If in fact he was involved in the assassination plot, that gives it quite a different flavor to that story. Well, until we get one of God's anointed to decide that we can dig up Edwin Booth's body and take a sample, I would think they'd be able to get, if either one of the brothers had any descendants, they could get DNA samples from them. But apparently that there's something wrong with that particular theory. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow. But once again, we'll be talking about something strange and off the wall as we race down the last few days of this year to 2026. So until tomorrow at this time, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.